Good evening. My name is Spencer Izen, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm a social scientist with the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association, and I'm joining today's discussion from the University of British Columbia, situated on the unceded territory of the Musqueam people. My current work relates to the documentary and disclosure practices of public bodies in my province and how they use them to mediate their relationship with transparency, drawing on socio-legal and socio-technical systems theory. In short, I study freedom of information and government secrecy. In my observation, many of our conversations about these subjects fuse trust and transparency together, and whenever documents are unavailable, public discourse positions government secrecy in competition with the human and quasi-constitutional right to access government's information. Among the constituent units of this argument is Louis Brandeis' oft-cited 1913 remark that sunlight is said to be the best disinfectants, the electric light is the most efficient policeman, in his essay, What Publicity Can Do. This phrase has acquired a religious following among those within transparency movements, and it's taken as a biblical axiom of those who demand disclosure in the name of the common good. But much like actual chemical disinfectants and actual sunlight, too much of an ostensibly good thing can become hazardous. And to that end, I want to revisit what publicity can do based on what publicity does. And just to note, publicity is the progressive era term for transparency. One of the works that's been foundational in my thinking about government secrecy is an article by philosopher C.T. Nguyen entitled Transparency as Surveillance. Nguyen writes that, without prejudice to the legitimate good that transparency does, it can also, quote, sharply curtail its subjects' freedom of action, which limits their ability to do bad and to do good, end quote. He further writes that, quote, transparency is not an unreserved good. It is a rough medicine we must take with caution. Trust and transparency, despite being hypothesized as returning positively correlated outcomes, sometimes works in opposing directions. There's an increasing wealth of empirical research outside freedom of information too that demonstrates this and leads me to believe that when we decry cultures of secrecy exist in governments, that decry is also mirrored by cultures of suspicion among the publics, plural intended, warranted and sometimes unwarranted. In my view, bureaucracy cannot be expected to entirely work in the open, and this is the fundamental issue with trust and transparency. Any genuine transparency policy intervention must accept and embrace the literature that potential chilling effects on disclosure do exist. And for me, in my research, this gives rise to a conception of freedom of information's documentary disclosure as a form of bureaucratically mediated surveilling of the live archive of civil servants' work. The corollary of this is that when civil servants seek privacy, general public should cast a critical rather than a jealous or suspicious eye in determining whether the withholding of information is reasonably justified or not. The secondary inquisitive output of this framing is that when we learn of scenarios like the Greenbelt scandal in Ontario, where civil servants have opted to deliberately not keep records by way of sharing screen shares, using instant messages, or subjecting the bureaucracy to unnecessary need-to-know cultures, the critical observer asks what the absence of records does to the effective and efficient delivery of government services. When we demand that records be created or decry their unauthorized destruction or lack of creation to begin with, in my view, it must come with the appreciation that records are created for the primary purpose of supporting an organization's business activity, and second, as evidence of that organization's activity to outsiders. This understanding allows for more precise discussion of what solutions are necessary when record-keeping standards in government are departed from, or when concealment becomes the de facto policy of our public administrations. These perspectives move past the justificatory framework that's well suited to a rights-based approach to the compelling disclosure. It's an approach that works fine for lawyers and within our body of constitutional and administrative law, but is not equipped in my view, to offer insight on how transparency policy is to be administered or reformed. Not every discussion, in my view, should or could be made public. Deliberative secrecy, cabinet confidence, and professional confidence are all narrow and legitimate grounds upon which records disclosure should be considered, but not necessarily an inherent affront to the public's right to know. In my view, and in the research view as well, they guarantee what political operatives refer to as the fullness and frankness of discussion and what legal professionals refer to as candor. Certain public interest secrecies can enhance the authenticity of the public record, and in turn produce a more effective and accountable government through other actors in what legal scholar Seth Kramer calls the ecology of transparency. None of this is an argument for greater secrecy in an already excessively and sometimes pointlessly secret country. It's an argument for reframing the conversation about transparency and trust in relation to government based on where people are at through research and meeting them where their work intersects being exposed to sunlight. In turn, this allows us to more expertly judge the use and abuse of secrecy. Most pressingly, in my view, it's in the best interest of those demanding disclosure, which includes myself, to revisit what publicity can do based on what publicity has done and for whom. Thank you.